with a year 3 class. I had a kid who used to lose it periodically. If I didn't restrain him, he would have thrown blocks, scissors, anything in sight. I had to hold him round his arms and send another child for another member of staff. It was sudden, not premeditated, but I had to protect both him and especially the other children. There's no time to think about ticking any boxes. Real world, a lot of real world examples coming in. And by the way, gosh, porridge. Porridge. Graham says every day for me, 3 spoons of rolled oats, honey and add boiling water. Lowest heat for 4 minutes until it bubbles, James. Stir and heat. Sit for 8 minutes as it thickens.
That's fantastic.
Every person has a different porridge way in life, don't they, James Elliott?
It's great. There needs to be a thorough survey. More work to be done on this.
On the panel. I'm away tomorrow. Susie Ferguson's in. Back Wednesday. Nalini Baruch, James Elliott. Kia ora to you both. I'm Wallace Chapman, and Checkpoint is next. Stay with us on RNZ National.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei. Does ACT effectively want to build jails for children and have the Department of Corrections run them? Party leader David Seymour live on his $700 million plan to hold young lawbreakers to account. And we talk to retail businesses being priced out of insurance by repeat ram raids. A light bulb moment using Auckland food scraps to feed the national grid. One massive cheating allegation from a Warriors sponsor has a CEO reversing up at speed. And we're apparently staring down a perk session. Employers ditching the free fruit, coffee and other work freebies. Really scandalous. You can watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. The Defence Minister says the Defence Force has lost about 10% of its workforce over the last year, and it's hoped a pay boost will persuade more people to stay. The government has made a pre-budget commitment of more than $400 million over 4 years to increase pay across the services. Andrew Little says there's increased pressure from events like the cyclone response, training Ukrainian troops and the requirement to patrol the wider region.
It's clear that rates of pay in our Defence Force have fallen behind rates payable for comparable roles outside the military. Enlisted personnel aren't subject to the Employment Relations Act. They can't join a union and they can't go on strike. But we know Kiwis expect them to be there when we need them most.
Andrew Little says there's about $320 million over 4 years to upgrade infrastructure. A Wellington business owner says a ram raid last year could still put him out of business because of the insurance costs. Derek Beeling spent thousands replacing the frontage of his Brooklyn bottle store after it was hit last July, only to be robbed again in the new year. Mr. Beeling says his landlord will be forced to pass on a massive rise in the insurance excess to him and 5 other businesses in the building.
At the time, the landlord's insurance, the building insurance, had an excess of $1,000. The insurance company made it clear that on renewal of insurance, the excess was going to increase the building excess to $25,000.
Retail New Zealand says its members are reporting premiums multiplying by up to 15 times after their stores have been hit. West Coast residents are being advised to delay non-essential travel as the region prepares for more heavy rain. Met Service has issued an orange weather warning for parts of the Tasman region and much of the West Coast, with up to 350 millimetres of rain expected in the Grey and Westland ranges. West Coast Emergency Management's Claire Brown says Westland has already had considerable rain in the last week, and this next deluge could be intense but not long-lasting.
We are looking at rainfall intensity of up to 30 millimetres an hour, so those are fairly high amounts for us. It's only for a certain period of time, overnight and into tomorrow about lunchtime.
And Westland District Council has pallets of sandbags available in Hokitika for people in the areas likely to be worst affected by flooding. Porirua Mayor has thanked residents in about 1,000 homes who have been without water for almost 24 hours for their patience. A water valve broke at 6 p.m. last night, causing 5 other pipes in Cannons Creek to burst. Wellington Water had set up water trucks in most of the affected streets, but Anita Baker says she dropped off water to one man who couldn't leave his home.
I had one gentleman ring me not long ago and actually went and delivered him some water because he had a disability and couldn't get out and needed to take medication, couldn't get down to the water cart. So I've been up there this afternoon and seen him, but that was just a one-off. Everybody else who's put something on my page has actually been really, really good about it and understanding.
Wellington Water says the pipes have been repaired and all homes should have running water by 7 o'clock tonight. A Pasifika overstayer who was detained after a dawn raid in South Auckland last month has been granted a temporary visa and will no longer be deported. The man's lawyer, Ōtautahi Foliaki, says the Associate Immigration Minister, Rachel Brooking, reviewed the case and approved the temporary visa on Thursday. It means the man is now eligible to apply for residency. Ōtautahi Foliaki says the man was detained for almost 4 days at Manukau Police Station, then released hours before he was due to be deported. Immigration New Zealand has been approached for comment. It's 5:04. New Zealand finished second in the $1 million final race of the Sail GP Series in San Francisco this morning. In a tense final, Australia outmanoeuvred the New Zealanders on the first leg and then held off a late challenge to win by 6 seconds. Australian skipper Tom Slingsby says it was a nerve-wracking final stretch.
It's bad that this is going through my mind so close to the finish and when we're in that position, but I was thinking, I can't believe you're going to lose it from here, and I can't believe I'm going to choke like this in front of all these people, everyone watching around the world. That actually went through my head. We had such a comfortable lead.
The win was Team Australia's third in a row. The Black Caps opening batter Will Young says touring Pakistan has been great for the squad's preparation ahead of this year's World Cup in India. The tour finished with New Zealand picking up a consolation 47-run win in the fifth and final one-dayer in Karachi. Young scored 87 this morning to go with his 86 in the opening game, and so was pleased with his tour.
I'm stoked to get an opportunity, as you say, to play all 5 of these ODIs at the top of the order. It's something that's new to me, opening the batting in one-day cricket, so I'm learning in these conditions, but I'm stoked to get that opportunity and put some runs on the board.
The Black Caps' next outing is a T20 series against the UAE in August. And the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic host the Southern Steel tonight in a bottom-of-the-table clash in netball's ANZ Premiership in Hamilton. Both teams have 3 games remaining this season and won't make the finals. That's the news.
Celebrations after the coronation.
A really moving moment, and then scenes of choirs from around the Commonwealth being beamed out to the 20,000 people who are inside the grounds of Windsor Castle.
A future king anointed.
You mustn't forget the children. What was the lad's name?
George.
George. He's a king in the making, all right.
And pigs run wild in St Bathans.
Make sure all the gates are closed, take a decent torch. You know, they're very, very quick animals when they get going.
Parties, princes and pork. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
RNZ National funded through New Zealand on air. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, south to Taranaki, Taumarunui, Taupo and northern Gisborne, cloudy periods. A few showers for today. Period of heavy rain tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and localised downpours. For the remainder of Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today, rain developing tomorrow evening. Taihape, Te Whanganui and Wellington, mostly fine today. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon and possibly heavy. For Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, occasional rain today, but mostly dry about the Kaikoura coast. Heavy rain developing tomorrow morning, then easing to showers later. Now for Fiordland and Westland, rain today, heavy falls, turning to heavy showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms. Canterbury, high cloud today, scattered rain developing tomorrow morning, heavier inland. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, scattered rain mainly inland, becoming widespread tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a shower or two and drizzle developing tomorrow. It's 5:07.
Thank you, Marama. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. ACT wants to spend $500 million building youth detention centres that would be run by the Department of Corrections if it's in government. The party says young lawbreakers need to be held accountable for their actions and can't be allowed to walk out of a facility without any consequences for escaping. It comes off the back of a relentless spate of ram raids, some involving children as young as 11 years old, and stolen cars. The centres ACT is proposing would replace Oranga Tamariki run facilities and cost $44 million a year to operate. Well, joining us now is party leader David Seymour. Kia ora.
Good evening.
Can you tell us a little bit about what these would look like and whereabouts they would be? Would they be attached to other prisons, and what age group you're thinking of here?
Well, 14 to 17 is the youth justice age. I don't imagine that they would be physically connected to youth prisons. I do imagine that they would be relatively small facilities, not big 1960s or 70s style institutions. They would be run by corrections with a mandate, unlike Oranga Tamariki, to say, look, you're here as a punishment, not just as support. You obviously need support. It may, in many instances, be the first time that a lot of these kids who've had pretty tough lives get the mental health support, the physical safety, the food and education that they need to go straight. But they're certainly not going to be there as a free ride. They're there because if there's no ultimate consequence for youth offenders, then they just breach every other sanction that the state has. And I hear from youth police officers who say, we have to take kids to an Oranga Tamariki facility. There's no security there. They walk out, thereby breaching a court order. So it's our job to pick them up and take them back, and then they walk out again. And as we're filling out our paperwork at the front door, they're running out the back door. And you can imagine how demoralising that is for police.
So run by the Department of Corrections, what you're talking about basically is prisons for children, aren't you?
Well, you can use that terminology if you like, but I think what's more important is the victimisation that I see when I go and visit dairy owners.
It is important to be clear about how you imagine this operating. You would have it run by the Department of Corrections, and they are jailers in essence. So you're talking about a jail for children, aren't you?
I think that's circular logic. I think we're asking corrections to do their job of corrective action. There's a combination of both a punitive purpose but also a rehabilitative purpose in the Purpose Act of the Corrections Act, the Purpose section of the Corrections Act 2004. I don't think having a naming war is going to help. What I think will help is saying to New Zealanders that there are actually consequences for actions, that lower level sanctions for younger people do work, and the alternative is having no real hard consequences until a kid turns 18 and end up going to adult jail, and that is actually cruel.
There are already youth justice facilities where young people are, in essence, locked down. They're not free to come and go as they like. And I'm just wondering what evidence there is that what you are proposing leads to less offending and better outcomes in terms of rehab. Where is the evidence for that?
Well, first of all, just to address a couple of points before answering your question. There certainly are facilities. They're full. People in the system know that there's nowhere else really to take kids, and kids know that, so they know nothing can happen to them. Second of all, there are youth aid police officers who tell me it's absolutely futile taking them to places that they can otherwise leave. Thirdly, what evidence is there? Well, I just challenge people to answer the question, how can it possibly be the best we can do to have constant tag and release, using up police resource, allowing every other sanction to be ignored, and then ultimately saying, having faced no serious consequence to date, you turn 18 and go to adult prison. That cannot be the best that we can do. In my view, well-designed corrective facilities for youth do enable rehabilitation and will end up leaving us with a safer society than we have right now.
The evidence seems to suggest otherwise. Department of Corrections figures show that 70% of under 20s are re-imprisoned within 48 months, and according to corrections data, more than 3 times more likely to re-offend than the general prison population. And you'd be well aware of research that Sir Peter Gluckman has done around this, and he has said we need to get children off the prison pipeline. So all evidence is to the contrary, it seems, to what you are suggesting. Are you just going to ignore that evidence?
Well, first of all, the fact that people who are released from prison re-offend is not surprising given the total lack of commitment to rehabilitation in our current system.
But you want the same department to run these facilities. And that is also one of the issues, isn't it? If they're failing to deliver rehabilitation in the current setting, why do you think that they would do any better in a children's prison or a young person's detention facility?
I think you're presenting a false choice, Lisa. You're saying the choices are either the corrections department, as we know it, that fails to do good rehabilitation and, yes, has a very high recidivism rate. That's not in dispute. But the false choice you're offering is that the alternative is what we have now, where youth offenders terrorise shopkeepers, terrorise the community, and know that nobody can really do anything to them. If those are our two choices, we might as well give up. The third choice, which ACT proposes, is to actually have consequences for youth offenders and actually work towards rehabilitation that is genuine. That's why, for example, we've said for a long time, if you want to get parole, you must make an effort to learn to read. The idea that we release kids who can't read, can't get a driver's licence, therefore can't get a bank account because they have no ID and won't get a job and will probably be picked up for a driving offence almost immediately. That is insane. That needs to change.
Rangatahi has done a lot of work on this, right? They published a report just last month on best practice for youth justice facilities. Have you read that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and you will know then some of the recommendations for facilities that work best. I'm going to read from the list. You tell me if your facilities would have this. Areas outside devoted to animals or cultivating vegetables. Do you imagine that the facilities you're proposing would have that?
Well, I don't intend to design them at that level of detail. I think that's a job for corrections to do. But
I suppose what I'm saying is... Sorry, can I just carry on with this list, David? Sorry. Because if you want to do something that's better than what we have, again, evidence suggests things like social workers who have academic qualifications in specialty areas are the best to deal with these young people. Will corrections officers have that?
Well, it depends very much on whether corrections and their youth guys that we propose would hire such people. You seem to be assuming that there's a contradiction between having corrections with their mandate of being both in charge of a punitive role but also a rehabilitative role, wouldn't do that for youth offenders in their custody. What we're proposing is actually to invest more because the present approach that New Zealand is taking does not work. It's wrong of you to assume that because we want to invest more in youth justice, that we're not prepared to take a constructive and rehabilitative approach. I don't know where you get that assumption from, but it's not a correct one.
Really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. That's David Seymour, ACT leader there. Interested in your thoughts on that. 12101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 16 minutes after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Retailers are warning insurance hikes in the wake of ram raids and other crime could force many out of business. Retail New Zealand says the rising costs mean more than 80% of its members are going under-insured. Bill Hickman reports.
A stolen car crashed through the front of Derek Beeling's Wellington bottle store in the early hours of the morning last July. Since then, the business owner has spent thousands of dollars rebuilding and securing the frontage of his small business, only to be robbed again in the new year.
We have burgled, in fact on consecutive weekends, burgled through a different point of access. We just got the window restored first time, and the same group of young people burgled the shop the next weekend.
Mr. Beeling says his landlord will be forced to pass on a massive rise in insurance excess to him and 5 other businesses in the building.
At the time, the landlord's insurance, the building insurance, had an excess of $1,000. The insurance company made it clear that on renewal of insurance, the excess was going to increase the building excess to $25,000.
Ravinder Singh's Pukekohe dairy was hit by 2 ram raids within 10 days of each other late last year. He says he feels betrayed by his insurers, who, despite receiving higher premiums and a greater excess, still haven't paid out his current claim. He says each raid cost the business tens of thousands of dollars.
I was the one who's the victim here, and I'd given them all the proofs, all the ownership, all the invoices, highlighted everything over there. But there's something I don't know what. I think they don't want to settle the claim. Might be they have too much claim to settle, and that's why they hold me up in that.
Greg Harford, Chief Executive of Retail New Zealand, says the effect is being felt by businesses all over the country. And considering retailers typically make less than $1 profit of every $20 spent in store, they're really hurting.
We've heard from businesses whose insurance costs in response to specific incidents of crime have risen from something like $2,000 a year to $30,000 a year. And some of these costs just are not sustainable for small businesses to manage and carry.
Spokesperson for the Insurance Council of New Zealand, Christian Judge, says the best way for retailers to keep a lid on premiums is to bolster security.
You would expect to see different levels of measures in place across those different types of businesses to make their premiums more manageable. Here we're talking about bollards, shutters, special glass, alarm systems. That's not always easy, and it's not always appropriate for every type of business.
Derek Beeling says he's been in discussion with his local council, but bollards are not practical in the limited space outside his store. He says the council suggested bike racks or bus seating to limit access to his storefront. If the measures go ahead, it could reduce the insurance excess to $10,000.
Could I handle it? We'll see. We employ local people, we pay very good wages. We'd love to be able to keep going. But unfortunately, it may not be possible in the current environment.
Derek Beeling says he often finds himself awake at night, wondering when the next hit will force him to close his doors for good.
A Christchurch trust working with at-risk youth is one of more than 130 to have their funding cut by Oranga Tamariki. The Youth Alive Trust has been around for more than 3 decades and runs holiday programs for young people from low-income families who might otherwise miss out. Oranga Tamariki says the funding decision is based on a need to focus investment on the higher needs of Tamariki and whānau it supports. But the trust believes that is short-sighted. With us now is Youth Alive Trust Manager James Redpath. Kia ora, James. What do you think of this decision to cut funding?
It's a real shame for young people in our community. There are a lot of young people who can really benefit from these types of holiday activities, keeping them out of trouble. And I think the government is really aiming at working with the most high needs of young people. Sometimes they've already fallen off the cliff, you might say, rather than kind of preventing. Maybe that is early intervention young people who might be heading that way. And we try to work with the early intervention young people.
Yeah, so what do you see as the role of those camps that you were running? What's their purpose and who's going to miss out here?
Well, yeah, we run camps and holiday activities for teenagers and for intermediate young people. And we're looking at places where young people can connect with each other, connect with youth workers, do new experiences, learn new hobbies, and really keep them off the streets, give them something proactive to do, something physical to do. And we run clubs and activities all year round as well, with our weekly clubs as well. So if we can get them in the holidays, maybe we can engage them throughout the week too.
So what do you think the consequences are of not having this available to people? You described yourself, well, I suppose in essence, as the ambulance at the top of the cliff, right? Catching young people before they get into trouble.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we can't claim to be the answer, and we know it takes a village to raise a child, so we can just be one part of the answer to kind of supporting young people. They say for a young person to be have good well-being, they need 5 positive role models, and our youth workers can be one of those positive role models in their life. So it just means in the holidays, that's one less role model that they can have, one less set of activities, and they're looking for something to do. What can they do in the holidays?
So how many kids do you reckon have been through these holiday programs?
Yeah, over the last 10 years, so we've had this contract with government for 10 years. We've had 2,000 young people through our programmes. That's about 160 spaces per year. And I realised Oranga Tamariki's hands were tied and they've got a new direction and head office kind of made these decisions. But it is a shame for organisations like us and the other 130 organisations who've lost that funding.
They have said, and you touched on this, that they're concentrating on higher needs and also they wanting to devolve control to Māori community and whānau. Do you fit into the models that they're trying to move to at all?
No, I don't think we do. I mean, our focus is all young people. Some of them are high needs and some of them have been involved in some of these ram raids and have been involved in crime, but some of them come they're not high needs and they're not at risk, but we just advertise and take any enrolment. There's no referral process. But sometimes those young people need to mix. And if you put all the young people with high needs together, sometimes that can cause more trouble. Now, I'm not saying Oranga Tamariki need to reverse their decision for us, and I understand and accept their decision to run programmes for their high needs young people, but maybe MSD or some other government funding on Ministry of Youth Development needs to pick up and run activities for all young people and not so specific.
Really appreciate your time, James. Thanks for joining us. That's Youth Alive Trust Manager, James Ridpath there. In a statement to Checkpoint, Oranga Tamariki Deputy Chief Executive, Māori Partnerships and Communities, Darren Haimona, says Oranga Tamariki is currently going through a transformational change as it works towards the new strategic direction. And that change includes transferring funding and decision-making to Māori and communities so they can help children and their families in ways they know will work. As part of that, and following consultation and feedback, changes were made to the funding of 132 providers involving about $5 million in the 2022-2023 year. Oranga Tamariki provides around $500 million in funding annually to 600 NGOs, strategic partners and communities, they say. It is 24 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know your thoughts on the ACT Party's proposal that they spend $500 million building secure youth facilities for young offenders, and they want those to be run by the Department of Corrections. Let us know your thoughts on that one, 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines. Ane Amarama, mena pita pita kōrero.
Thank you, Lisa. The ACT leader says its plan to build youth detention centres would give young offenders help they need to change their behaviour, but not be a free ride. The party says young lawbreakers need to be held accountable and will spend $500 million in building the centres. Leader David Seymour told Checkpoint that Corrections would run the facilities with a mandate to remind the offenders they were also being punished for their behaviour. He says if there are no consequences for youth offenders, they'll just continue to break the law. Retail New Zealand says small retailers are being hit with massively hiked insurance premiums following a rise in ram raids and other crimes. The body's chief executive, Greg Harford, says its members are reporting premiums multiplying by up to 15 times after their stores have been hit. The Defence Minister says pay in the Defence Force has fallen below comparable roles outside the military. The government has made a pre-budget commitment of more than $400 million over 4 years to increase pay across the services. Andrew Little says the Defence Force has lost about 10% of its workforce over the last year. And Kieran McAnulty will take over as the lead minister for cyclone recovery in Hawke's Bay following the sudden defection of Meka Whaitiri last week. The Prime Minister says Rachel Brooking will pick up food safety and Peeni Henare becomes Minister for Veterans. Just having a look at some things that are happening on our motorways and roads at the moment. Waka Ōtautahi, Auckland Northland is advising that State Highway 18 Upper Harbour motorway, a crash is blocking the Squadron Drive on-ramp on State Highway 18 eastbound. They're saying the ramp is closing and avoid the area. Let us know if you see other things. And I do have a warning for overnight. You don't want to be stopping gridlock on the motorway, but be prepared for a few roadwork closures on Auckland's motorways overnight, including a closure eastbound from Great North Road to Grafton Road, including State Highway 1 North and South links from 10 p.m. It's 27 minutes past 5, Lisa.
Kia ora rā iho. The boss of the Warriors' major sponsor has called out the NRL referees after what he says is cheating of the highest order. One New Zealand chief executive, Jason Paris, vented on social media following the Warriors' latest loss, saying the Warriors haven't been given a fair go by officials this season. While we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Controversial, how has the NRL responded?
Well, as you can imagine, the NRL aren't very happy to have those kinds of comments floating around against their officials. So the NRL CEO, Andrew Abdo, was the first to call out Paris's comments and say that they were unacceptable and that there would be an investigation into the social media comments that he made over the weekend. It was around particularly the reference to bias against the Warriors, and Jason Paris also questioned whether the referees had money on the Warriors to lose. These are not things that the NRL take lightly. We've just heard from Graham Ansley, who is the head of football operations for elite competitions, and he does a weekly sort of catch up around some of the things that have happened around the NRL over the weekend. This normally takes around half an hour, and this is only just wrapped up. So today he was going a little bit longer. He spent around 15 minutes going over the Warriors' decisions in their loss to Penrith on Saturday. So he ran some video, he went through and he was defending the referees every time, saying that no decisions in there were against the Warriors, no incorrect calls, nothing that had come out in the social media or out in the media was correct. So that puts the NRL in a little bit of a difficult position because he's part of a sponsor. He's not actually attached with the Warriors as a club in any way. So any way that the NRL could actually sanction him would probably, it's a little bit of a different one. It's just like any kind of regular fan, sort of outspoken on social media.
Except I suppose he has a bigger following and platform and a stronger connection to the team. And by suggesting or querying whether these referees have money to placed on a game, that's alleged match fixing by any other name. They're serious allegations.
They are serious allegations, and I think the NRL would definitely, Graham Ansley today was coming out with a serious response saying you can question the referees' decisions, but you can't question their integrity, because the integrity comes back onto the NRL and the administrators of the NRL. He was saying that the referees don't kind of choose themselves for the games. The NRL appoints them to a game, and at no point has there ever been more transparency around the officials. He says that they get dropped if they make incorrect decisions, and that they do get followed up through the NRL. So they were very strong on this, that they would take it further. So he couldn't give us an update on the investigation, but he did say the Warriors as a club had actually gone to the NRL and wanted a little bit of an explanation for themselves, which they were happy to give.
Okay, let's move on to Sail GP. Who took our $1 million? Who took Aotearoa's $1 million of prize
Blame
money?
the Australians. It's that Trans-Tasman rivalry. They got across the line 6 seconds ahead of New Zealand. So that was their third title in 3 years. So they've really sort of taken a stranglehold on Sail GP. It was New Zealand, Australia and Great Britain who were in this grand final in San Francisco this morning. Australia, had been dominant all season. So they'd won 16 events. Well, actually 15 events. New Zealand had won 16 events. So this, at the moment when it counted the most, when that $1 million was on the line, they couldn't get there. They'd actually, for New Zealand over this weekend in San Francisco, they hadn't had a very good racing weekend, but they'd managed to get into the top 3 and had sort of taken a different part of the course to Australia and Great Britain. We're a long way back. At the halfway point, if you'd switched on at that point, you'd seen Australia 200 metres ahead and you thought, it's over. New Zealand's got no chance here. And it was really, Australia made an error where they fell off their foils. So these are foiling catamarans. They fell off their foils at the top of the last mark. New Zealand definitely took advantage of that, closed in. It really was then a fight for the line, but that 6 seconds was meaning that Australia got across. And it's not going to be too long until we have to sort of battle it out again. The season 4 starts in June, so only 4 weeks.
6 seconds and $1 million. Thank you, Felicity. Sports reporter Felicity Reid there. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And of course, it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nai ko Anand Zaki. Anand, Westpac New Zealand's profit is down by a third.
Well, what a surprise, eh? This is the final installation, of the 3 bank earnings we've had over the past week. So we had BNZ and ANZ New Zealand both announcing first half profits that increased. So this morning it was the turn of Westpac New Zealand to announce their first half profit, and they were down by a third to a cool $426 million compared to $640 million last year. So last year the bank had a one-off gain from selling its life insurance business for $400 million. This time, no one-off gain. They've also had to increase the money set aside for bad debts. The economy is, of course, slowing down and customers are feeling the squeeze. So the bad debt provisions are at $154 million compared with a gain. They made a gain on it of $10 million a year ago. Revenue is also down a couple of percent and operating expenses are also up. Now, the bank said, excluding one-off items, its underlying performance was stable. And they also commented on the recent severe weather in the north. Chief Executive Catherine McGrath said they still don't have clarity about a number of issues for homeowners and businesses affected by that severe weather. Now, on those hard times I mentioned earlier, the bank is warning everyone that the global outlook is uncertain. Inflation is high, consumer spending is high, and that's increasing the risk of a hard economic landing. And now it has to be said, Westpac aren't seeing a significant number of customers needing hardship assistance, although that demand is slowly increasing.
And I suppose that goes hand in hand with the next story, which is about Tower Insurance. It's set to report a loss.
Yeah, busy year for insurers. There's been a surge in claims from floods and cyclones, and Tower is forecasting a loss of $3 million for the first half of the financial year. That's compared to a profit of $3 million a year ago. And it's tallied the cost of 3 major weather events it's dealt with. So there's the Auckland floods, Cyclone Gabrielle, and then there was the 2 cyclones in Vanuatu. And all that is expected to cost somewhere between $260 and $310 million. And now Tower's direct liability for each event is just under $12 million. The rest is covered by reinsurance. There's also more than 9,000 claims for floods and cyclones, more than half of those being for the North Island floods. And they're also expecting the average claim to cost double the rate of other recent major weather events. And that's because of deeper floodwaters this time around in high density areas, which means more damage, contamination and landslides. So tough time for insurers this time around.
Shall we take a trot around the markets, Anand?
Yeah, a better day for the local top 50 index, Lisa. It was up 53 points or 0.5% to 11,942. New Zealand dollar was stronger against the US at 63.1 cents and a touch weaker against the Aussie at 93.2 cents.
Thank you, Anand. Ka kite, Anand Zaki there with Business News. Let's get to some of your feedback now. This is on our interview with David Seymour, ACT leader, and their policy announcement today. They want to spend $700 million on a youth justice package, including $500 million to build youth justice facilities, detention centres in essence. This person says David Seymour just wants to lock up young kids instead of lifting them up. They've been punished all their lives already. On the other side of the coin, though, at last, someone who is prepared to do something about these ram raids. Do keep the feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Nelson has long been known for its sunshine wages, but a new report shows they've fallen to 14% below the national average. At just over $60,000 a year, they are the lowest average wages in New Zealand. So what does that mean for those on the breadline? Well, Samantha G has more.
For some, news of Nelson's low wages comes as no shock.
I'm not surprised at all. I'm reminded of this every time I see my paycheck and struggle to pay the basic household bills.
The Nelson woman has been a librarian for 13 years, but earns little more than the living wage. She says the mortgage on their small flat is a big constraint.
We live paycheck to paycheck. If we get an unexpected bill, like a car repair or like an appliance needs repairing, we've got to put it on the credit card and just pay it off slowly. And we just cut back on our basics at the grocery store to be able to afford that. Look, we try to make all of our own food, grow what we can. We don't buy alcohol, cigarettes, anything like that.
A man who works in the health sector caring for young people with disabilities chooses to live in a caravan to reduce his housing costs. He is in his 70s, works part-time, and says retirement is not an option.
Not at all. Not on the foreseeable future, no. Not unless I wanted to cut back my costs to an extent where it would be existing rather than living.
He's been in the disability support industry for more than 15 years, where people start on minimum wage, and says his last pay rise was around 70 cents an hour.
Even were I to work a 40-hour week, I would not earn enough to afford a flat or a house in Nelson. I live in a motor camp in a caravan. The rent in the motor camp is relatively low, at just over $100 a week.
Another woman who works as a public servant says she lives in Nelson but commutes to Wellington for work, where the pay is better.
I've stayed in my job and continue to commute to Wellington for work, as changing jobs for women in the region would be a significant pay cut, and my mortgage is dependent on both mine and my partner's income. I know at least 4 others in the same or similar positions to me. We had good salaries in Wellington, and the Nelson market just doesn't match it.
Nelson MP Rachel Boyack says sunshine wages have long been a problem in the region, where people are expected to earn less for the privilege of living in such a beautiful place.
We do have a lot of labour-intensive industries that do traditionally have lower wages, and then we also have real pressure on housing because it's such a desirable place for people to retire to and to move to.
Nelson Budget Services financial mentor Tessa Bell says she's seeing an all-time high demand for services, with the organisation booked out a month in advance.
What we're seeing now is a change from the lower income into the middle income. We're certainly seeing an increase in people as their mortgage rates increase. That's really leading to people needing to look at a whole raft of changes in their personal finances.
She says Nelson has long been a low-wage economy, particularly in the service industry.
It's pretty clear that people earning sunshine wages don't really have the time or the energy or the money to enjoy the sunshine. We have an amazing area. You know, it's beautiful up here. There's so much to see and do. But if you're working 50, 60 hours a week on minimum wage job, you don't really have the time.
She would like to see more employers offer their staff the living wage to help improve the quality of life for those on low incomes.
Samantha G reporting there. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some more of your feedback now. Lots of it coming in on our interview with David Seymour about ACT's proposal for youth justice facilities. This person says, sorry, I've worked in youth justice for more than a decade and David Seymour has no idea what he is talking about. Youth justice residences have been doing good work, and to suggest corrections can do a better job without the necessary training, resources and knowledge is just an attempt to jump on the youth crime bandwagon to get more votes without relying on evidence. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to join the debate, text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to go to the headlines now. Ko marama anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. The ACT leader says its plan to build youth detention centres is not a jail for children, but will simply be asking corrections to do their job with young offenders. The party says young lawbreakers need to be held accountable and will spend $500 million in building the centres. ACT's David Seymour told Checkpoint the centres would be both punitive and rehabilitative. He says that trying to change children's behaviour before they reach adulthood and stopping them ending up in prison is the goal. The Defence Minister says there's been increased pressure on Defence Force personnel in recent years, which is why it will receive a $400 million boost in funding. Andrew Little says the Defence Force is being stretched thin by helping with civil defence emergencies, training Ukrainian troops and the requirement to patrol the wider region. The Prime Minister says he's attempted to contact former Minister Meka Whaitiri several times, but she has not returned his calls. Ms Whaitiri quit the Labour Party last week and she was going to run for Te Pāti Māori at the next election. Chris Hipkins, who has just returned from the coronation of the King in London, says he had still not spoken to her. And officials are hoping that water will be restored to about 1,000 Porirua homes shortly shortly after a broken valve left them without supply for more than 24 hours. Wellington Water says the pipes have been repaired and all homes should have running water by 7 o'clock tonight. It's 5:42.
Admitted he didn't actually check the safety of an intersection where 2 people died when he visited it for an inspection just 2 months before the crash. Jade Cummings and Steve McNee died when the vehicles they were in collided on the outskirts of Dunedin in September 2019. An inquest into their deaths is being held in Dunedin this week. Timothy Brown was in court.
15-year-old Jade Cummings was a passenger in a ute driven by a 17-year-old friend on September the 17th, 2019. The boy drove through a stop sign controlled intersection just out of Outram, about 25 kilometres from central Dunedin, and collided with a car driven by Steve McNee. The boy doesn't remember the crash, and Miss Cummings and Mr McNee died. The question before Coroner Marcus Elliott is whether the signage and warnings in the area were appropriate and whether the young driver had a chance to see them due to vegetation obscuring them. Just 3 months before the crash, nearby resident Judy Reid raised concerns with the Dunedin City Council about overgrown vegetation obscuring the view of the road.
I noted that the hedge was so overgrown that it was hard to see oncoming traffic at the intersection of Huntley and Church Road West. I thought it should be trimmed back.
The Dunedin City Council sent a graduate roading engineer to the intersection about a month later and decided there was no issue.
I replied that same day, noting that I disagreed with the findings. To support my position, I advised that when my husband gets into that corner in his grader, he has to get the grader 1/4 of the way onto the road to be able to see. In addition, I noted that the next corner down on Church Road East and Granton Road was always cut back and was not as busy.
The roading engineer, who has name suppression, gave evidence to the inquest this morning. In response to questions from Rebecca Jordan, the counsel assisting the coroner, the engineer told the court he was relatively new to the role at the time. His words have been revoiced.
That road safety aspect wasn't part of your role as a graduate transport engineer planner?
No, it was not. But although I moved to road safety aspect after a while, yeah, at that time I didn't know even the road safety aspect role too much, yeah. I was just 8 months maybe with my role there in council.
He conceded if sent to do a similar inspection now, he would take a far broader view of the intersection's safety.
So when you visited this intersection, you weren't looking at it through a lens of road safety?
Probably. Just as a general driver, I looked at it. I didn't look at it as a specific road safety engineering aspect of it.
A photograph taken by an Otago Daily Times photographer on the day of the crash, which formed part of the evidence at the teenage driver's trial, shows the 2 stop signs at the intersection partially obscured by vegetation. They were also smaller than the recommended size. There was no evidence the teenage driver had attempted to brake before going through the intersection, and he was likely travelling between 60 and 76 kilometres per hour. The impact of the crash was so powerful, it frayed Mr McNee's seatbelt and tore the seatbelt's tongue from its buckle. Serious crash analyst Constable Jack McGilbert told the inquest he thought the 100 km per hour speed limit in the area could be halved to improve the intersection's safety.
I was quite surprised that this road was an open road, 100k. Was suggesting that stopping at 100k into a stop sign could be a task if you don't realize it's an intersection. So one is maybe prior to the intersection, maybe having a speed limit of 50.
The inquest is expected to conclude tomorrow.
Timothy Brown reporting there, and it's 5:45. Some more of your feedback now on ACT's policy on youth detention facilities and our interview with David Seymour. This listener says prisons for children won't reduce youth offending. What will is reducing child poverty, improving employment opportunities and generally giving these young people hope. This policy is just about scaring people into voting ACT. It's got nothing to do with actually helping people. But another person says it's about time someone was brave enough to sort out youth justice. Good on you, Mr. Seymour. And this one too, you are calling these proposed institutions prisons. How about an education and support facility, an educational and support facility? Someone else says, I'm in favour of youth detention facilities. These kids need to learn some discipline, no matter how hard their lives have been. And another one before we move on. As we know, corrections rehabilitation policy is pathetic, and the thought that corrections officers are going to have all the qualifications to assist youth turn their lives around, one is dreaming. Look at the data. 2101 on text or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. There have been at least 50,000 parties across England celebrating the King's coronation. Prince William and Kate made an unannounced appearance at Windsor, surprising some of the people eating their lunch. The partying followed the very formal ceremony watched by around 18 million people in the UK as the King was crowned just after midday. The BBC's Nikki Fox.
In Northampton, onion bhajis and samosas were on the menu as the Indian community hosted a big lunch with everyone welcome.
People have come out to join in and celebrate this momentous occasion, and long live our King. Absolutely delighted. I am very much into the royal family. I don't apologise for it, and I'm just so happy that we've seen something which is once in a lifetime.
Dozens of people enjoyed homemade curries, pickles and pakoras, all shared by the different tables. Parents, grandparents and children all joined in on the fun.
Here in Northampton, it's all about people from different communities and faiths coming together to eat and enjoy each other's company. And it's this party atmosphere that's reflected across the rest of the country.
And in Windsor, people who turned up for their big lunch got a surprise visit from the Prince and Princess of Wales. William and Kate looked relaxed as they mingled with the crowds, though it was all a bit too much for one young royal fan. Well-wishers were delighted by the royal visit.
I asked them if they'd got wet, and they said that Kate said that she had got a bit wet, and the gowns that they were wearing are really heavy, so especially when they get wet, they're really like towels. And then we offered William some of our Purple Rain, which is our gin cocktail, and he accepted, took a little cup and helped himself to it and tried some and liked it.
And in Swindon, Princess Anne joined a community street party, handing out commemorative tins to local youngsters. While in Surrey, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh joined scouts and guides for their celebrations. And Downing Street held its own street party, hosted by the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you for that. It was lovely to have you. Have you had a good weekend?
Community workers and youth groups were among the guests, along with Ukrainian families. And America's First Lady, Jill Biden, joined the party. And away from the capital, the sun was shining at Bude in Cornwall, and children were enjoying the coronation weekend. They gave the day a Cornish flavour by hosting a big cream tea, all delivered by paddleboard. It was a day for communities across England to celebrate the new king.
It's 10 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 2 months of using a dinghy, a husband and wife stranded by Cyclone Gabrielle can now leave home on a slightly less precarious river crossing. The storm's heavy rain swelled the Manawatu River, northern reaches, and the water's power, plus a huge build-up of logs, swept away the bridge to their property. Now, Charlie and Hamish Menzies are waiting for a permanent fix. Jimmy Ellingham reports.
After Gabrielle struck, Charlie Menzies for weeks had the same morning routine.
Hop out of my car, put on a backpack, cross the river, climb up the other side, and then basically change into professional clothes on the side of the road. Yeah, which is okay on a nice day, but when it was raining, it's lucky I'm in a gully. The language wasn't so good.
It was only a short trip in the dinghy, but Mrs. Menzies would have to get herself across and then scramble up a bank to a parked car on the other side. Then it was off to Dannyburg High School, where she's assistant principal. Life's a little easier now. A couple of weeks ago, a digger driver came up with the idea of using a fallen girder as a footbridge. And a ford through the river was created using the washed-out bridge deck. It's suitable for four-wheel drives.
Since the walking bridge has been in place, the river has been up to the bottom of the walking bridge, which would be at least a metre over the ford. We are concerned about truck access for stock, and there actually has been one accident with a worker already. They got pushed by a trailer into the river.
The Menzies live at the end of the Rangatahi Road, north of Dannevirke in the Ōtautahi district. They have about 2,000 units of stock on their sheep, beef and deer farm run by Mr Menzies. When the bridge washed away, the Menzies were at home, well above the raging river.
The significant rainfall event, coupled with the release of a log jam of dead willow branches that we've learnt was about a kilometre up the river, came down and wiped out our only road access to our farm, to our house.
For 2 days, they were effectively trapped.
We have a jet boat, and so on the Thursday we launched the jet boat about a kilometre downstream where it was safe to launch. We'd actually left a ute on the side anticipating the top of the bridge to go, so I was able to go to school and do some planning for my absence for a couple of days.
Jet boating wasn't a long-term solution.
You can't leave a jet boat in the river, you have to take it out, and I can't ask that of my husband twice a day. So we put an SOS call out to friends, and they supplied a dinghy, and we put that on ropes so you could pull yourself across.
Access may have improved, but stock trucks and contractors to do work or supply fuel can't make it across the ford. Mrs Menzies said the washout's effect on the farm is significant.
When this event first happened, my husband was thinking, can we carry on? However, there is always a way. We've cut fences into the neighbouring property south of us, spent a bit of money putting in gates and a culvert so we can take sheep south, which makes what should be a half-hour job to load stock a half-a-day job. The biggest worry is if things go wrong and you need help but they can't get access. If you had an animal that you needed a vet for but the river's up, that's that.
Ōtautahi District Council Group Manager of Infrastructure Chris Chapman says it's too early to know when a permanent fix will be in place.
We won't be able to be in a position to fully replace that structure until we get our emergency works funding confirmation from Ōtautahi, New Zealand Transport Agency.
Heading into winter, Mrs Menzies says the lack of certainty is a worry.
It's a big concern. As one of my work colleagues says, I come down to go to work not knowing if I can get to work every day, and that does take a toll. Hopefully we're swinging round to an El Nino rather than La Nina weather pattern.
A cool, dry few months would be a welcome relief for this waterlogged region.
And if you were listening to that story from Jimmy Allingham, do check out the video version on our website. Pretty incredible how they're having to get across the river every day. In Auckland alone, we send 100,000 tonnes of food waste to landfill every year. Now, food scrap bins are being rolled out across the city to help use that food for fuel at the country's first large-scale waste-to-bioenergy processing facility. Reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Nick Monroe went to Reporoa in the central North Island to check it out.
Food waste makes up about half of every household's general waste and is responsible for around 4% of the country's carbon emissions. Until recently, it's been left to rot in landfill. General Manager of Waste Solutions at Auckland Council, Parul Sud, says food waste is a resource we should be utilising.
If you take out and process it appropriately, has benefits, right? So you can make other products with it. So why would you want to put it in landfill? And it also creates greenhouse gases while it's in there.
The rollout of green food scrap bins is now underway, with each household to receive theirs by November this year. Residents can fill them with banana peels, tea bags, bones and even tissues. Parul Sud says the project has been a long time coming.
We started probably 11 years ago in terms of looking at what can we do, what does the city need, what is the processing end of it, because if you imagine the city is quite large, so we needed a large processing plant to deal with the material.
Enter EcoGas Reporoa. This 2-hectare facility can process 75,000 tonnes of organic waste a week and turns it into renewable energy. The plant, the largest in the Southern Hemisphere, takes products from restaurants, businesses and now Auckland Council. As you might imagine, all of that rotting waste creates a pretty pungent smell. Director Andrew Fisher says the least offensive aroma comes from McDonald's hamburger buns, but he's been put off fizzy drinks thanks to their sickly, sugary stench.
You've got some coffee grinds, and lots of coffee grinds over there, peelings from places which prep food for rest homes. You have got packaged products, orange drinks, milk bottles.
The food scraps start off here. This is about 26 tonnes of them, but that's only half a truckload. Then the food scraps are processed in the depacker, which removes any kind of packaging, and the food is then blitzed into a smoothie-like substance. That mixture then ends up in these two tanks where it sits for about 70 days, and then it's split into the two byproducts, fertiliser and biogas.
As Andrew Fisher explains, the biogas then goes on to provide power to local tomato growers and others.
So we've got the biogas coming off, it's created biomethane, so you've got your CO2, you've got your gas to grid. We also run a generator here, so we're creating electricity. When you make electricity though, you actually lose 70% of the energy in heat. That's a friction process. We capture that water. Hot water then goes across to turners and growers to replace their use of gas.
But he says New Zealand is lagging behind other countries, some of which are already using the fuel for vehicles.
So Waitrose in the UK, running 120 Scania trucks now on it. Volvo's got trucks, so it's a replacement, drop-in fuel. We've got the existing gas network in New Zealand, so we can utilise that.
EcoGas would like to take on several more council collections in the North Island and has plans for another facility in the South Island. Ultimately, it hopes to create a circular food system where nothing goes to waste.
Now, that is one to really watch on our website, the rancid soup of leftover food and what it looks like before it gets turned to energy. Also interested in what your strategies are for reducing food waste. What do you do with the kind of, slightly beyond their best date things at the bottom of your crisper bin? 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. On the subject of youth prisons, you've got a lot to say on that. This person says, so I wonder what else you could spend $44 million on a year to help these kids before they get into trouble, such as Outward Bound or youth wilderness camps to teach them purpose in life and learning life skills. The 40-odd million is what ACT would put towards operating new youth justice facilities, secure facilities, prison for young people. And this person says, I've just listened to David Seymour and have to say that he is the only politician that actually provides some hope for this country to ensure and rebound from the woke enforced bankruptcy we are otherwise facing. Another person says, David presented a very punitive approach, all tried and failed. When the going gets tough, all we get is tougher criminals. They need to be in healthy homes with good role models. Not enough out there is our problem. And another person says, children must be shown how to take responsibility for their actions. A rehab unit could help. And someone else says we should also build more prisons for white-collar criminals while we're at it too. Or would that be two laws, says Rhonda.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Kia ora, I'm Marama Tipole. ACT wants to spend $500 million building youth detention centres that would be run by the Department of Corrections if it's in government after October's election. It follows a spate of ram raids, some involving children as young as 11 years old using stolen cars. ACT's leader David Seymour told Checkpoint that the centres would differ from those run currently by Oranga Tamariki by not just being about support, but also punishment.
It may in many instances be the first time that a lot of these kids who've had pretty tough lives get the mental health support, the physical safety, the food and education that they need to go straight. But they're certainly not going to be there as a free ride.
David Seymour says if there isn't an ultimate consequence, then the young people will keep offending. Michael Hill Jeweller says it will station security guards at all of its North Island stores following a series of daylight smash and grabs. Stores in Waikato, Wellington and New Plymouth have been hit recently, prompting the chain to employ guards at all 34 North Island shops. Michael Hill's chief executive Daniel Bracken says the shops already have security measures such as fog cannons, alarm screamers, personal alarms for staff, security cameras and DNA spray technology. He says guards have been employed at the Auckland stores and the company now needs to extend the security elsewhere. Defence Force personnel are in line for a pay bump as part of a major budget boost unveiled by the government. The near $420 million announcement was characterised as the biggest pay increase in more than a decade. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, who's just returned from London, says individuals will get between $4,000 and $15,000 more a year, kicking in from July.
In the UK last week, I saw firsthand the esteem in which our NZDF personnel are held. It was humbling to meet with our trainers putting in 100-hour weeks to ensure the Ukrainian armed forces have the skills necessary to defend their homeland against Russian aggression.
A further $328 million has also been committed to upgrading infrastructure such as housing and communications. And the Prime Minister has finalised his portfolio reshuffle after the sudden defection of Meka Whaitiri. She was relieved of her ministerial portfolios after quitting Labour last week to switch allegiance to the Māori Party. Chris Hipkins has confirmed Kieran McAnulty will take over as the lead minister for cyclone recovery in Hawke's Bay. Rachel Brooking will pick up food safety and Peony Henare becomes Minister for Veterans. Joe Luxton is promoted from Under Secretary to a Minister outside of Cabinet with Customs, Associate Agriculture and Associate Education. Chris Hipkins says he left Meka Whaitiri several messages while he was in London but has not had any response. West Coast emergency staff are on standby around the region should bad weather escalate overnight. Met Service has issued an orange weather warning for much of the West Coast with up to 300 millimetres of rain forecast to fall until tomorrow night. Claire Brown from West Coast Emergency Management says residents should be making preparations and contacting friends and family.
We're encouraging people just to be prepared. If anyone is concerned about their homes, have a plan in place about what they need to take if they need to leave home in a hurry, and also a bit of a planned arrangement about where you might go.
Claire Brown says the heaviest falls are expected to begin early tomorrow morning and last until lunchtime. A court has heard a son of one of two men accused of murdering a Christchurch teenager at an out-of-control birthday has asked his father to come and scare gang members causing trouble. Daniel Sparks, who is 44, and Joshua Smith, who is 33, are accused of killing 16-year-old Connor Whitehead in Casebrook in November 2021. Crown Prosecutor Aaron Harvey told the High Court the men arrived with one sawn-off and one pump-action shotgun after the call for help.
The Crown case is that from here there were two shots fired, one by each of the firearms, one by each of the defendants. From the evidence, the most likely scenario is that Mr. Smith was armed with a Stevens shotgun, which was the sawn-off one, and that he fired the fatal shot.
Joshua Smith's lawyer says he accepts responsibility for Connor's death but is guilty of manslaughter, not murder. A Pasifika overstayer who was detained after a dawn raid in South Auckland last month has been granted a temporary visa and will no longer be deported. The man's lawyer, Soane Foliaki, says the Associate Immigration Minister, Rachel Brooking, reviewed the man's case and approved the temporary visa on Thursday. He says the man is very happy now he's eligible to apply for residency.
It's become bigger than him, but for him personally and his family, they're really, really happy. All he ever wanted was to go to work as a construction worker and provide for his family and live peacefully here in New Zealand.
Soane Foliaki says the early morning raid was unnecessary and caused undue harm to the man and his family. The man was held for almost 4 days at Manukau Police Station, then released shortly before he was due to be deported. The search for survivors has gone on through the night in the southern Indian state of Kerala after a tourist boat capsized. At least 21 people died when the boat turned on its side on a river. There were chaotic scenes as crowds used torches to look for survivors. And back home, fire crews are at a blaze in Wellington on a hill in the suburb of Strathmore Park. Photos of the blaze show large flames and smoke wafting south over the peninsula and harbour entrance. That's the news. It's 6 minutes past 6.
Know My Town is back, a zesty podcast about Aotearoa place names. I'm in Paeroa, or longer named Te Paeroa a Toi Te Huatahi.
We're standing at one of those mineral pump machines. There's nothing in it. Might have to put a koha in there, no, I don't know.
And Who's the Lady on the Rock in Whakatane?
Is it Wairaka?
Listen to Know My Town on Apple, Spotify or any podcast app. And at 3:30 Thursdays on afternoons here on RNZ National.
RNZ National funded through New Zealand On Air. Lisa, Owen and Checkpoint back in a minute, but right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. Northland, south to Taranaki, Taumaranui, Taupo and northern Gisborne. Cloudy periods with a few showers today. A period of heavy rain tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and localised downpours. For the remainder of Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today. Rain developing tomorrow evening. Taiape and Whanganui to Wellington, mostly fine today. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy. For Bulla Nelson and Marlborough, occasional rain today, but dry about the Kaikoura coast. Heavy rain developing tomorrow morning, then easing to showers later. For Fiordland and Western, rain today with heavy falls, turning to heavy showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms. In Canterbury, high cloud, scatter rain developing tomorrow morning, heavier inland. Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy. Scattered rain mainly inland, becoming widespread tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a shower or two and drizzle developing tomorrow. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6, Lisa, and I've just got a little bit of a traffic reminder, especially for those in our Auckland roads, and it's not updating, but the main thing, there's going to be some closures for you to expect after 10 o'clock tonight on some of our roads. Check out that NZTA website for more details so you don't get stuck in traffic. Lisa.
Ka pai marama, thank you. No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Defence Force personnel are in line for a pay bump as part of a major budget boost unveiled by the government. The near $420 million announcement was teased ahead of next week's budget and characterised as the biggest pay increase in more than a decade. Individuals will receive between $4,000 and $15,000 more a year, depending on their role, kicking in July. The Defence Minister, Andrew Little, told reporters the force has lost about 10% of its workforce over the last year, and it's hoped a pay boost will persuade more people to stay.
We have a moral obligation to ensure our soldiers, sailors and aviators are paid fairly for the critical work that they do on behalf of all New Zealanders. This is a responsibility that this government takes seriously. Just as we've increased wages for police, corrections officers and nurses, it's important our defence personnel who work hard on behalf of the country, often away from their families and in tough conditions, are paid fairly for what they do.
A further $328 million has also been committed to upgrading infrastructure, such as housing, communications and fuelling facilities. Both amounts are over a 4-year period. The Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, who returned from London earlier today, addressed reporters from the Beehive.
In the UK last week, I saw firsthand the esteem in which our NZDF personnel are held. It was humbling to meet with our trainers putting in 100-hour weeks to ensure the Ukrainian armed forces have the skills necessary to defend their homeland against Russian aggression. I can tell you from the conversations with counterparts that our Defence Force personnel are held in the highest regard globally and that their contribution in support of Ukraine is making a difference.
Chris Hipkins has today also permanently reallocated the ministerial roles previously held by Meka Whaitiri. Joe Luxton will be promoted to a minister outside Cabinet with responsibilities for customs and associate roles in agriculture and education. Rachel Brooking will be the new Minister for Food Safety and Pene Henare, the Minister for Veterans. Kieran McAnulty will take over the responsibility for the cyclone recovery in the Hawke's Bay. And in an unrelated move, Michael Wood will take over Nanaia Mahuta's oversight of the Waikato cyclone recovery at her request. On the eve of Australia's budget, the Treasurer in the Albanese government has revealed it will include a $16 billion cost of living relief package over the next 4 years. Some of that will slash hundreds of dollars off energy bills for households and small businesses. The ABC's Nicole Hegarty reports.
For Melbourne hair salon owner Katerina DiBiase, the electricity bills keep piling up.
20% minimum.
To possibly ease some of that pressure, Treasurer Jim Chalmers has unveiled a $1.5 billion package to give up to $500 relief on power bills. The money will go to 1 million small businesses and 5 million households, including pensioners and people on government payments, although the size of the assistance will depend on where you live. Katerina says any relief is welcome, but with last October's budget forecasting a 56% rise in electricity bills over 18 months, she says it won't go far.
We use a lot of power. It's not something that we can cut costs on. We're going into our peak season for power usage.
She says a one-off payment will have a limited impact.
It will ease it for one bill, but it's not going to get rid of the problem. The expense is there and it's increasing.
The electricity bill relief is part of a $14.6 billion cost of living package to be rolled out over 4 years, with the Treasurer still tight-lipped about changes to income support payments. Cassandra Goldie is the CEO of the Australian Council of Social Service. She questions how the electricity bill support will be divided.
We need something which isn't one-off, and certainly it won't cut it for people who are in this kind of situation. That's why we continue to say we've got to see that substantial increase to income supports.
The government's also revealed it's identified $17.8 billion in spending it will reprioritise, including the already announced $7.8 billion in response to the Defence Strategic Review. It'll also seek to boost tax receipts by $2.4 billion by increasing the petroleum resource rent tax, a tax paid by oil and gas producers. Greens leader Adam Bandt says the government should charge those companies even more and use the earnings to fund more substantial energy relief.
Australia's gas tax is fundamentally broken, and that means everyday people are going to lose out.
He says the government does have options.
If the legislation comes to the Senate, the Greens will push to improve it, to ensure that gas corporations pay their fair share of tax to fund the services that Australians expect, because at the moment, Labor is letting them off the hook.
For now, salon owner Katerina is hopeful Tuesday's budget will bring more relief.
A one-off, it's just like you had a lucky potluck this time and life goes on.
To the US now, where it's another tragic day with another mass shooting. The attack at a Texas shopping centre has left at least 8 people dead. President Joe Biden has described it as senseless. Witnesses describe a man opening fire indiscriminately at shoppers in a suburb in Dallas. The victims are aged between 5 and 61. The gunman was shot dead by a police officer at the scene, and Texas authorities have now named the gunman as 33-year-old Mauricio Garcia. He used an AR-15 style rifle and wore combat gear. On his clothing, he wore a patch bearing the name of a neo-Nazi group. The BBC's Aruna Iyengar reports.
Gunshots ring out across Allen Premium Outlets. Saturday afternoon shoppers run for their lives. This is a shopping mall 20 miles north of Dallas.
Like pop, 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 pop. And we saw sparks flying, like it was right in front of us, so we just ran into the Converse store. They locked the door. We all hunkered down in the back, and that's where we stayed.
You see the guy. There's this guy dressed in all black, wearing a vest, has an assault rifle, and he's just shooting at people right across. He was at like Francesca's area, shooting at people.
Police believe the gunman acted alone. The motive so far unknown. He was killed by a police officer who happened to be there and reacted quickly.
One of our officers was on an unrelated call at the outlet mall. He heard gunshots, went to the gunshots, engaged the suspect and neutralized the suspect. He also then called for ambulances.
Terrified shoppers were evacuated, many with arms in the air. As they left, there was more panic as some thought gunshots were still being fired. Police and emergency services blocked entrances to the mall.
My family and I reside about a mile from where this shooting took place. This community is home for us, and our hearts are devastated and broken tonight.
In Texas, there are few restrictions on possession of firearms. According to one group, Gun Violence Archive, Saturday's attack is the 199th shooting this year across the country where 4 or more people were killed or wounded. Saturday's victims are of all ages, children included, out shopping with families. More numbers to add to the toll of gun crime in America.
It's 16 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A new era of AI is upon us where fake music, arts and images can be created with a click. Deepfakes are videos of people that have been digitally altered and they're getting more popular. In Australia, an ABC Four Corners investigation is seeking a person anonymously posting deepfake pornography of several public figures. The E-Safety Commission has issued a takedown notice for the material. The ABC's Grace Tobin reports.
Hello everyone, I'm Alana and welcome to my channel where today we are jumping right into a little bit more of a Resident Evil 4 remake.
Video game writer Alana Pierce is no stranger to online sexual harassment. As a young woman working in a male-dominated industry, it comes with the territory. But now it's at a whole new level with AI-generated deepfake pornography.
It is really shocking when you first see it. It's really feels like you didn't consent. I genuinely feel like some of it's akin to digital rape.
A deepfake is an image or video in which a person's face or body has been altered to make it look like they're doing or saying something that never actually happened. It's been estimated 96% of deepfakes on the internet are pornographic, and there are entire websites dedicated to depicting celebrities and other high-profile women. Sharing this material can be a crime in some Australian states.
They want to have power over them. They want to have ownership of their bodies. They want to humiliate them or shame them. And that's something that's really uncomfortable and difficult to shake.
A Four Corners investigation has discovered a user posting deepfake videos of other Australian women, including 7 public figures. We set out to unmask the identity of the anonymous person by linking a username on the porn site to a YouTube account and cross-checking multiple email addresses. It led us to 53-year-old Tony Rotondo, an Australian living in the Philippines. He didn't answer questions about the videos, but told Four Corners he's been issued a takedown notice by the E-Safety Commission and said Australian laws don't apply to him because he's no longer a resident. E-Safety Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant says that's not true.
I'm afraid for him that is incorrect, as there is a verifiable Australian connection. A person who posts an intimate image without consent may be subject to a range of penalty and enforcement measures, including warnings, infringement notices, and court-issued civil penalty orders.
Police in multiple states are now investigating the videos. Professor Toby Walsh from the University of New South Wales, an internationally respected leader in AI, says recent advances in powerful AI systems have the ability to harm billions of people.
It's like social media again. We're testing it for free. And sadly, I don't think we've learned the lesson. There are certain harms that will come with the technology, and we will discover and pay the price, and eventually regulate.
A spokesperson for the Minister for Industry and Science, Ed Husick, says the government has received advice from an expert panel on AI, which is informing the government's next steps. Professor Toby Walsh is urging Australia to act.
We do need our politicians to wake up and think carefully and think about where we need to regulate. What are the problems that other people are not going to solve for us?
Prince William has paid tribute to his pa, King Charles, in front of the crowds at the coronation concert. At least 20,000 fans packed into the grounds of Windsor Castle for the event. After a day of formality, Lionel Richie and Katy Perry were among stars that had the royals up and dancing. The sky was lit up by drones, with the final display showing a large whale, a nod to King Charles and his love of conservation and the planet. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell looks back at the day.
From the intense formality of Westminster Abbey to the energy of the coronation concert on the east lawn of Windsor Castle, with an audience of 20,000, charity volunteers, NHS workers and guests chosen by public ballot. Watching from the royal box, the King and Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, Princess Charlotte and Prince George, and other members of the family.
We've seen it all.
There was music from the Coronation Choir, 300 singers from many walks of life and different parts of the UK.
And palm to palm is Holy Palmer's kiss.
There was drama from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, dance from the Royal Ballet, and humour from Miss Piggy.
Wait a second, Kermit, it's him! A lord! A real lord!
No, I just played one on television. Give me a bear with a marmalade habit anytime.
So adorable!
As dusk fell, Lionel Richie sang.
Come on and sing it,
and the royal box did its best to keep up. And then it was time to be a little more serious. Onto the stage came the Prince of Wales.
I want to say a few words about my father and why I believe this weekend is so important. But don't worry, unlike Lionel, I won't go on all night long. As my grandmother said when she was crowned, coronations are a declaration of our hopes for the future. And I know she's up there, fondly keeping an eye on us, and she'll be a very proud mother.
William talked about his father's 50 years of service, his work to protect the environment, to establish the Prince's trust.
And perhaps most importantly of all, my father has always understood that people of all faiths, all backgrounds, and all communities deserve to be celebrated and supported. Pa, we are all so proud of you. And I also want to express my pride and gratitude for the millions of people who serve in the forces, in classrooms, hospital wards, and local communities. I wish I could mention you all. Your service inspires us, and tonight we celebrate you too. I commit myself to serve you all, King, country, and Commonwealth. God save the King.
Rain keeps falling, rain keeps falling down.
There was a spectacular light show with a strong environmental theme. 1,000 drones over Windsor Castle and at 10 different locations around the United Kingdom. It was a celebration with a serious message of service, a theme which will continue tomorrow with the Big Help Out, when thousands of volunteers will give their time to help others.
As you heard earlier, there have been thousands of parties across England celebrating the King's coronation. But the Bunting and Union Jacks have also been out in full force across Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. This report starts with the BBC's Lorna Gordon on an island off the coast of Scotland.
Westray in Orkney. Beautiful, remote, and one of the most northerly parts of the UK to host a party to mark the coronation. This a lunch to which not just a street, but the entire island was invited.
We've got a fantastic community. It's just a really, really good community that holds together whenever it's needed.
And you came dressed for the occasion?
Yes, I got the Union Jack and the tiara, and I wore it to church this morning as well.
This was a day for soup, sandwiches and conversation. And volunteers on this island, which is known as the Queen of the Isles, say they've been preparing a feast fit for a king.
Many hands, and everybody's been very willing and helpful. So a lot of our WRI ladies offered to bake, and that was just a sort of call out to say, can anybody bake? And
an island of bakers.
An island of bakers, yeah.
Scotland did have less street parties, but here on Westray, a community celebrated and memories were made.
A stereotypically rural Welsh start to the day. Tractors down the high street, on their way to the town's main field, where it's picnics and Prosecco all around.
There's a real sense of community here in the Vale of Glamorgan today, and there's more people here than there were in Cardiff Castle yesterday to watch the coronation live on the big screen. And of course, the weather may have something to do with that. It's much better today, but that sense of people coming together, regardless of reason, is also playing a big part.
We just want to enjoy some sunshine. Now it's nearly summer, and now that COVID's over and we can all get together and celebrate, really. Not too much here to celebrate the coronation, though.
It's fantastic to celebrate, King Charles going onto the throne, but at the same time, as a byproduct of that, having people come together, like I said, and celebrate is a really good thing.
The King of Rock and Roll signed off here before the main event started in London earlier this evening.
In one of the most westerly parts of the UK, some artisan bacon was on the menu in Northern Ireland. Local butcher Pat Doherty brought people together in County Fermanagh to try a local delicacy.
Well, a couple of years ago, Charles and Camilla did come to Fermanagh and they actually ate the Fermanagh black bacon.
Now it's cooked a special way, isn't it?
We wrap it up in rushes, we tie it up in the rushes, and we add sort of local mint that grows along the shore.
The reeds this bacon's cooked in come from right here in the loch, and Pat's been cooking today for a bunch of local young farmers, for some of the clubs that have come together.
We are quite rural here in Fermanagh, so when it is a big occasion like this, it's nice that we take the time out of really busy schedules.
Meanwhile, not all communities in Northern Ireland see the royal family as their monarchy, but there were many events today in mainly unionist areas where British traditions are enthusiastically observed. And street parties too brought communities together for the areas that chose to celebrate.
In the UK, scientists have named a new group of butterflies after the villain Sauron from the Lord of the Rings novels. Tolkien describes Sauron as an eye rimmed with fire, yellow as a cat's. It's hoped the Hobbitish homage might help conservation efforts. The BBC's David Lewis explains.
Sauron, evil Lord of Mordor, forger of the ring, and now beautiful butterfly. And it's all down to some eye-catching colouring. The black rings on the insect's orange wings reminded experts at the Natural History Museum in London of the all-seeing eye described in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And the building's butterfly curator, Dr. Blanca Huertas, is hoping the unusual name might help the animal in the longer term. Naming them after key fictional characters helps to pique people's interests, she said, and that is important for their conservation. So far, a pair of species have been added to the newly named Saurona genus. It's thought more will follow. It's not the first time J.R.R. Tolkien's odious character has lent his name to a creature. Perhaps appropriately, there's already a Sauron species of dung beetle, a frog too. There's even a Sauroniops, a carnivorous dinosaur. But the Tolkien connection doesn't end there. Other relatively recently named beasts include the Gollum attenuatus, a bottom-dwelling shark. There's a species of weevil, Macrostyphus Gandalf, and the hairy-footed moss forest blossom bat of New Guinea. Official name? Psychonisteris hobbit.
What an intriguing array of creatures. Well, that is about all we have time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. You can check out Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up speaks to the owner of a tiny theatre in a small Kiwi town getting worldwide attention. And wow, more attention tomorrow on First Up at 5 a.m. So do tune in for that one. We'll catch you a little later in the day.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Todd Zahner. ACT says their plan for youth detention centres may be the first time young offenders get the help they need to change their behaviour. The Prime Minister says Defence Force personnel will get between $4,000 and $15,000 more a year as part of the nearly $420 million in additional funding to retain staff. Michael Hill stores are beefing up security following a series of raids on their premises by employing guards at all of their North Island shops. And emergency management officials say heavy rain for the west coast that'll make travel in the region hazardous is expected to begin early tomorrow morning. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, why do so few teens have bank accounts? We look at the suggestion opening one is too cumbersome. More gun violence in the US prompts yet another call by President Biden for a ban on assault weapons. Could an American-style populist revolution happen here? Author